Nonprofits in historically marginalized communities are facing unprecedented demands in this era of backlash, whether it's immigration, LGBTQ issues, poverty, or violence against Black women and girls. These grassroots organizations are on the front lines of our most pressing social problems. So, how are the foundations which fund them responding to these new needs and challenges? Here to speak to us about that is Ana Oliveira, President and CEO of the New York Women's Foundation, the largest women's foundation in the United States and one of the largest in the world. In full disclosure, the New York Women's Foundation is a funder of The Last Sip. So, Ana, thanks for helping us get started and for joining us today. I wanted to talk to you because, as I said before we came on set, oftentimes people don't know how funders make funding decisions. And we know that for a vast majority of these organizations, foundations like yours, which give out $60 billion a year to small community organizations that are doing all the type of work that we're speaking about, don't understand how those decisions are made, but they're so crucial. But one of the things I wanted to just mention and hear your reaction, because I was so astounded by it when I heard, is the reason why a women's foundation is essential is that out of all the money that's given each year, only 7 cents of every dollar goes to programs that focus on women and girls.
Yes, it's an unfortunate reality and definitely something that we and many others are working to change. So your first question about how funders make decisions, how transparent it is, how mysterious it is, foundations in philanthropy is very varied, is very different. If you have 20 foundations, you have 20 different ways of doing business, of making decisions. That is because, the accountability of foundations is limited. In our case, we are a public foundation, so we have a level of accountability that's a little different, is much bigger. We're all accountable to our boards. But in the case of a public foundation, when you get contributions from the public, that's where that word comes from. The public supports. In our case, the public helps to make decisions and allocate the resources that we raise for the benefit, for the public good. So that kind of understanding of philanthropy, which is a little bit by, for, and about the people in that sense, is the kind of philanthropy that we practice. Foundations typically have a mission, have areas of focus. In our case, we focus on all women, cis, trans, gender fluid, that are in New York, that are in what we call communities. They are less valued, they are less invested in, that are arbitrarily left behind. And we seek to, make differences in leveling off that playing field.
One of the things that your foundation has done under your tenure is actually focus on exactly the type of communities that you are speaking of.
Yes.
One of the interesting things is that in some ways you were slightly ahead of the curve of other foundations who somehow, many after 2016, have been scrambling to figure out how to totally focus on these communities that they now realize are no longer going to be getting whatever support they thought was happening from the federal government and are now under pressure. So I'm wondering, what made you decide to do that? Because changing the focus of an organization, particularly one like the New York Women's Foundation, is a hard thing to do. So why did you take that on, and what is that about?
I always like to say that the foundation was started with a real good proposition. 31 years ago, women of wealth and community leaders came together, and that in and of itself is an unusual thing. And we were perceived then as a non-viable, this group is not going to work out. They have women, they're very different. They're going to be not able to come together. But the reality is that women came together for a shared goal. And that goal was really to deal with the disparities, to deal with the inequalities. Today we call them inequalities, right? And we have a profound understanding of two things. The first one is that problems and solutions live in the same place. Therefore, folk who are living the issues and who are on a daily basis creating the solutions to whatever the issues are need to be at the forefront, not just included, but in the leadership and also in the decision making of the solutions. And that means that we tend to, at the New York Women's Foundation, we tend to partner with, follow our grantee leaders. So, for instance, one of the reasons that we fund your program is because of your vision, is because of your work, is because of your leadership. Our job is to recognize that. Our job is to get the resources to support your leadership, your vision, and like yours, of many others.
One of the biggest examples, I think, of everything that you're talking about that's hugely concrete that you just announced is the fact that you're partnering with Tarana Burke, who's the founder of the Me Too movement,
Yes.
and you put $1 million behind an initiative
Yes.
to combat gender-based violence among cis and trans women.
Yes.
It's an example of what you're talking about. She's leading
Yes.
it with you all. You've put money behind it.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the strategy there? Because in that's also New York focused, but it's also, I would imagine, beyond New York as
Yes.
well, which might be a shift.
Yes. So for us, the first time that I heard Tarana Burke speak, she said, I created Me Too 10 to 12 years ago. It's actually, I think, 12. And at that time, I got one small grant or two small grants. We're talking about grants under $3,000 or around $3,000, $5,000. And I reflected on that. And, here it is, an incredible leader who is a black woman who was not seen in her leadership and her work
That's right.
10 years ago. Imagine where the world could be now if that had happened, if proper, ability to see her leadership and then to invest in her leadership had occurred. If had that occurred, I think we would have a little different world, right?
Right.
So what caused in us at the foundation was, how do we respond? We are late. We're 10 years late. But let's not get any later than 10 years. Let's respond. We don't feel that we need to sit down and at the foundation decide the strategy. We need to hear and listen to Tarana's strategy. She has a brilliant strategy. She very clearly said, I want to interrupt violence. I want to attend to survivors, healing. And I want to support survivors to together figure out what needs to be different so that violence doesn't happen again. To us, that's a very clear path. That's a very powerful path. And actually, it's a path of transformation from inside out.
Right.
Ownership by survivors. So it was very easy for us to talk to our donors and make a beginning catalytic investment of $1 million. We want a shared fund. We are doing a fund with Tarana partnership in which the decision-making of the grant-making is a shared decision-making, where we not only listen to survivors, to experts, to leaders, but we want them accessing the decision-making with us. So philanthropy has become much better at listening. We listen. We listen much more to those who have expertise. In our case, we have the ability to work in sharing the decision-making. So that will be a first for us. We hope that together we will co-create something that can influence philanthropy as well, something that can bring to the tables of grants decision-making more and more leaders of community without having to have them join boards,
Right.
without having to take on that other work, just by virtue of doing their work.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights and your wisdom with us today. Really appreciate it. And with our audience, a lot of whom are involved in social justice and never get to hear from someone like you. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you
for more information about the New York Women's Foundation and how to help Black women and girls in need, please go to our website, www.thelastSip.org, and click on How to Help.